So I want you guys to kind of go back with me to, I was 13 years old. I'm the oldest of three boys, born and raised in Pittsburgh, moved to Virginia Beach. And for me growing up, I was the troubled child. I was the one that was loud and fast talking. I loved life. I like to say school was my favorite thing. I just didn't like going to class. And I enjoyed that aspect. And my parents at the time were trying to figure out a way, like, how do we control this kid, but also get to know his friends? How do we bring all of these things together? And so as we kind of looked at where we were going from there and how we moved forward in my family, my dad was like, you know what? We need to come up with something to kind of bring people into our circle and understand who we are and what we're all about. And so when I was about 13 or 14 years old, do we have the slides? I got nothing. Woo. So I was about 13 or 14 years old. Oh, we're not even the beginning. There we go. So I was 13 or 14 years old. My family decided to purchase a frozen yogurt shop. And they purchased the frozen yogurt shop in a little shopping district in Virginia Beach. And at the time, I didn't really understand. My parents we're going to teach you to work before you're legally allowed to work, which was, my parents didn't let me do anything illegal. And it was the first thing that they allowed was I could ride my bike for the 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. shift to work at this frozen yogurt shop. And it taught me all kinds of valuable lessons. I had to fire one of my friends before I was 16 years old. My dad walked in. He happened to have a flask. My friend did. And my dad didn't even say anything. He went home and said, you vouched for hiring him? You go vouch for firing him. And those kind of lessons were things that really were instilled in me. But at the time, there was so much going on, and for me, as that was the cute yogurt shop there. My nickname became Yogurt Boy. And for me, it became part of who I was. And my family, we are very proud Pittsburgh fans. We still have season tickets for the Steelers. My dad actually got them in '69. I was put on the waiting list when I was 4 years old. When I was 20, I finally was able to be off the waiting list. But we've had season tickets ever since. My brothers and I have kind of carried the torch since. And for us, this family yogurt shop was in a shopping center, and it became a thing. Every girlfriend I ever had, every friend I ever had worked there. My dad paid $2 over minimum wage. And at the time, there was just this growing idea, and people started to assume that the house we lived in, the car we drove, was all paid for by this yogurt shop. Little did they know my dad ran a candy business, a peanut brittle business. That was what funded everything. But at the time, we had a shopping center, and this is kind of a picture of the shopping center where our yogurt shop was, and this is 1995, right when we bought it. And so it's if you know Virginia Beach, there's right near the ocean front, but not on the ocean or anything there. And so we had this yogurt shop, and things were going fine. It wasn't a moneymaker, but it was something that my dad, we held, the baseball draft for our local community. My mom was the president of the PTA. The PTA meetings happened at our frozen yogurt shop. It became kind of something, a central idea of anything that we were doing in the community. And so then kind of fast forward to a year that, to me, I remember this day very, very poignantly in my life. In 1998, we had the yogurt shop still there, and I don't know if you could tell how the map changed, but we had this family-owned frozen yogurt shop, and then there was this business that decided to buy the plot directly on our property. And unfortunately, we were filed as a yogurt shop. They were filed as an ice cream fast food shop. Therefore, they could be on the same property as us. And I remember it. I remember being brought to tears because I was like, our family business, everything's ruined. What are we going to do? And my dad didn't even care. He was just like, I can't believe they did it. He's checking the bylaws, figuring out. He's like, well, okay, we'll be fine. It's all good. We have another year in our lease. And he's like, don't worry, son. We've built this community. We understand what's going on. And people will go wherever we decide to go. And so the cool part about this kind of fast forward in the journey is that our yogurt shop still succeeded at the time, even with the Dairy Queen in the front. We ended up moving it to the ocean front about 3 years later, and we kept it there for about 12 years. And so much of that was rooted in this idea that it's about who you are and doing business with people. And my dad was always the guy, we would go on vacations, and we would never go to the chain restaurant. We would go to the hole in the wall. And for me as a kid, I'm like, why? I love Olive Garden. I don't need the hole in the wall. The chairs are sticky, the bathrooms are gross. But my dad always looked at it and said, we want to work and we want to connect with the people that we know they care about what they're doing. And my dad had this picture. This is me as a young boy there in the yogurt shop. And he had this picture as well, which is a picture of him, which ended up being on the tickets for the Steelers in 1981. He had these pictures all over the wall. And I just thought it was because we were like proud Pittsburgh people. And if you know Pittsburgh people, we are very proud and loud and everywhere, mainly because we all had to move because there wasn't much jobs at the time. And we can digress on that side of the house, but this was kind of the elements of what was going on. And of course, my dad was a little bit influential on me. As you can see, this was me going to the other Super Bowls, and my family have been to all the Super Bowls the Steelers have been to and been part of that community. And I never understood why this was a part of our family. Why did we kind of broadcast these things out there? And my dad is a guy that has always lived by the rule of, I let my work do the talking for me. I'm not going to brag about what I'm doing or how much money I have or those kind of things, but we had this as part of like who we were and what we were doing. And so my dad in life at the time, I didn't realize that what we was truly building was a community and understanding the importance of telling your story and connecting with people at a very deep level. And for me, this was something that had always resonated. And as I was kind of growing in my career and as I started getting on social media and doing those kind of things, I remember very easily, I was doing an interview on Google Hangouts, rest in peace. And my dad texted me, and this is what he texted me. He's like, son, this social media thing you're doing is cool. And the context there is, that's the only picture of my dad on the internet. It's his LinkedIn profile picture. That's why it's that small. If you blow it up, it's like super grainy. And that's the only, I've worked really hard to find pictures that aren't on Facebook that were my dad, and he doesn't have a Facebook. He ran a global peanut brittle company that didn't get email until 2009. I'm the guy that wants to implant a chip into my arm to learn different languages today. And so there's a lot of those kind of differences and things that we are going on. But he said, son, this social media thing is cool, but nothing will replace the value of a handshake. And my dad was growing his business, even to this day. He will not sign a deal, not do a contract without shaking that person's hand first. And he's always valued this in the scheme of things. And so as I started looking back on my life and the things that we did in this frozen yogurt shop, the things that my dad did in the business, so much of this was ingrained on the idea of trust and community and connecting with people. And I think as we look in the digital world today, as you guys were listening on the main stages yesterday, along with a lot of the side stages, trust was an extremely big piece of it. Relatability was a big thing. My good friend Ann Hanley talked about that yesterday, talking about how important that relatability and that connection is. And I remember reading this tweet, my dad doesn't tweet, this text that my dad had texted me. And surprisingly enough, right there on air, I read the text, and I was like, you know what, Dad, you're right. Social media will never replace a handshake, and nothing we do online will replace a handshake. But if you invest in your community, you invest in telling your story, it will turn handshakes into hugs. And I'm a millennial, a page-wearing millennial, if you're curious what this is. And for me, it's about turning those into more opportunities, right? It's the idea that when you connect with people online and you meet for them for the first time, they don't ask you, how's the weather? They don't have it is a connection. There is a hug, there is a community, and there's an element of social media that allows us to do this if we're willing to invest in it. And so what I'm gonna kind of talk through with this conversation is really, how do we do that today? How does this work? And I've been very lucky and fortunate to work with some of the most iconic Fortune 500 brands, and I wanna put this as perspective. It's a little bit about my story, but it's more about how we can relate this in our businesses. And if you're thinking at the moment, well, this is all great, but I'm not that person, I don't talk as fast as you, I don't know what, I got to work with companies that had no story. Like, try to make IBM sexy on Instagram stories. No offense, IBM, right? I got to work with SAP at the Super Bowl and bringing these things together. And so for me, a lot of what these conversations are is I truly do believe we are living in the greatest time in history. Now, it might be hard to say that. We have mass shootings. We have lots of things that we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. But if I look at the world today, and those are my 3 daughters there. You might have seen that picture. That was actually yesterday, or 2 days ago. And for me, raising my kids, part of the thing that I love about living in this world is it does not matter your race, your sexual orientation, your resume, your background, where you live. We have the ability to connect with people around the world. If you like underwater basket weaving and you like doing it in your socks, I can almost promise there's a Reddit community for you somewhere. And this idea that me growing up in that small town of Pittsburgh, and most of my family, their only time they've left Pittsburgh is to go to Ocean City, which we can all relate. That's their view of the world. I've now been to 76 countries. My daughter has Skype conversations with one of my friends that's in Australia. She knows what Vegemite is. She hasn't tasted it yet. I don't recommend that part of the Australian connection. But when I look at this idea that I truly believe we're living the greatest time in history, I kind of got to back that up, because right now we are cutting through some crazy noise. And to give a little bit of context where I came from in this journey for me is I previously worked in cybersecurity at the Department of Defense at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. So of the 76 countries I've been to, 3 trips to Iraq, 2 to Afghanistan. I was a government employee, very blessed to work with those that are in a military. And real quick round of applause for anybody that, military and anyone that is sacrificing for us. And so for me, growing up, my dad, we kind of lived who we were, but at the time, especially in the 2005, 2010 range, I was working for this government contractor, kind of figuring out my way. I got promoted to this job because I raised my hand and said I was willing to go to Korea in 2 days. The next question they asked is if I had a passport, and I said no. So I had to go get a same-day passport to go to Korea at the time. But I ended up taking on a team of 32 employees. We were running a $19.9 million a year budget for multiple years, grew it into this giant training courses. But for me, one of the biggest aha moments came when I was in Afghanistan. And the first time I was in Afghanistan, and I got to connect with these military, active duty military members, and it was an amazing opportunity. We taught a class for 4 days. I got to brief the military on things that were going on. And one of the things around this military conversation was I got to get to know the people that were there. And funny enough, I was deploying a cybersecurity tool to secure our networks in Iraq and Afghanistan. And most of the people that were in my class were there because they put on their entry paperwork that they knew iTunes. Like, that was their premise of like, oh, iTunes, computer science. Oh, one button and you can bring down the drone over. It's cool. Like, that's who we were training. And so I got to know these stories. And to me, it was beyond inspiring. It was kind of like that idea was like, wow, like I got to know what was going on. And so I decided, like, this was my first foray into blogging or putting my story out there. And you guys can tell this is old. Anyone know what that network that is? Blogger? You guys remember Blogger? That's Blogger right there. And I decided to write this in 2009. And as you can see, I had a lot of followers, 5. And the 3 without pictures are probably my mom and my 2 brothers. And I started to write, and I started to kind of tell this story while I was there in Kuwait and Iraq and Afghanistan. And now that I've been to 76 countries, and even at the time as I was going to countries, people would ask me, like, where's your favorite place in the world to travel? And I would always say the Middle East. I still say it to this day. The Middle East is my favorite place in the world to travel. And my favorite country in the world is Bahrain. And most of the time when I say that on stage, people are like, what? So I decided to put it on a map. And it's a little island off the coast of Saudi Arabia. And what I found about this Middle East culture, and what I really found about the members of the military that I got to work with, was there were so many stories and so many things that were wrong about what I was being told growing up. What the media was kind of putting in front of me, the news that I had, even talking to my dad about how much I loved being in Kuwait and I could navigate the entire country without a map, and the idea that I got to know locals and I would spend hours in coffee shops. And so for me, this was something that was extremely empowering, but at the same time, it kind of opened my eyes to this idea that if I'm not telling this story, who is? And where can we go from here, as we're doing it? And so I went back to my boss at this government contractor, and I said, you know what? I want to blog for our website. I want to tell stories. I want to kind of connect these dots. I believe in, we should be empowering these conversations. And so I submitted 2 blogs, and they came back to me with simply this statement here, which just said, sorry, Brian, I love that you, quote, want to blog for us, but you write like you talk, you tell too many stories, you talk about experiences. I can't figure out where our sales numbers are going to be drawn here, and I really don't think you should ever be writing for a company. Talking about a kick in the gut. I came back from Iraq and Afghanistan. I got stories to tell. I got people to talk about. And then my company was like, no thanks. We're good. We're good. We don't need to do any of that. And so for me, I kind of jumped into social media around that same time. And I jumped into it from a standpoint of I lived in Virginia and wanted to connect with sports fans that didn't live there. And that's the only way I kind of looked at it. And social media, even like as I looked at it, was made for me. This is me as a kid. My mom likes to say I came out of the womb talking. I have no problem talking, which is why this career kind of ended up being my dream job and perfectly aligned. And for me, not only was I the kid that had no problem talking, but I'm also that kid that's right there. I was diagnosed ADHD at 31. And I love the ability to connect and inspire and empower people. But at the same time, there's this element of like, how do you stand out? And in 2009, when I was told that your story doesn't matter and you're telling too many stories and focusing on experience, it hurt. And not only did it hurt so bad that it put me into not telling stories online or sharing myself at all. And I put this up there because I've now done 4,000 live streams in the last 4 years. I've worked with some of the biggest brands on launching campaigns. But if we go back to way back, 2014, that's how far back, this is my YouTube channel. That would be total views of YouTube videos. I'm bragging here, right? We look at it as 29, 6 years ago, right? So in 2014, these are the only videos I had. This is the only content I was putting up because I was told my stories don't matter. You write like you talk. No one's going to listen to you on this side. And the #1 video I had was this video here, which is me getting pranked by the local military there in Iraq. As they were like, Brian, bring your BlackBerry with you. We're going to come out. This is going to be the perfect thing for you to video. You like to take pictures. And little did I know, they brought me up close, and it was a CRAM that literally shot off, and it scared me so bad because it was so loud that I dropped the BlackBerry and cracked it, and this video still lived. And that video became like the thing that was on my YouTube channel, and that was the only thing that I kind of had put out there. And so as I kind of looked into this journey and as I started kind of emerging in a lot of things that were going on, the things that I look at now, and the reason I tell that story of bringing you here is that if you're feeling like, hey, I don't have a story to tell, or I don't know how I can bring my brand out, I'm with you. I understand that. I was there, and I was there in many moments. And I talked a little bit about my dad, but I'm a mama's boy. And one of the biggest dates for me in my life and a lot of things that we do, even the hashtag that's on my chest, is my mom in November 2nd of 2013, she was asking me about social media, and I'm like, social media, and she was like, why do you feel like so burnt out? I'm like, it takes me forever to write what other people want, and I have to figure out how to craft these perfect posts, and it takes me like an hour for a Facebook post, and I had no Twitter presence from like a social media, and she was like, well, son, the thing about what you've always stood out is that you were unapologetically yourself. You had no problem wearing a hat, crazy shoes, being who you are. Are you doing the same thing online? And it was a very aha moment for me. I ended up writing this, I didn't use the hashtag at the time, be yourself on my mirror in Sharpie. Don't do it in Sharpie. Use like something that wipes off your mirror. It was a great idea in the moment. Then I had that like in my mirror for the longest time. But for me, this was a moment where I started to kind of put myself out there, and I started to understand the importance of sharing.